And can you all remind us, since you're standing in for Manuel, who you are and
Sure.
what you're going to tell us about?
Yeah.
Thank you. Your mic should pick up.
How's everybody doing?
Thank you, everybody, for coming. My name is Fernando Lopez. I am with Sewer Maintenance. Particularly, we're here filling in for Manuel Lopez. I don't know if you guys have met him before. He has done a few meetings here before. Jack?
My name is Jack Johnson, and I'm also with the Sewer Maintenance Department. And well, anyway, I'll speak a little bit louder so the folks in the back can hear. My name is Jack Johnson. I'm also with the Public Utilities Sewer Maintenance Department. Fernando and I are both easement inspectors. Some of you guys might once or twice a year see someone walk through your backyard with one of the vests on.
Thank you.
All right, we good? All right. Just kidding. Fernando and I, we're both easement inspectors with the city. We're kind of the eyes and the ears of the sanitary sewer system that flows throughout. So if you see somebody in your backyard walking around taking pictures of the easements and stuff, most of the time that's one of us. We'll always be identifiable in things. And if you do see one of us, feel free to stop, say hey, and ask a couple questions. We got this PowerPoint up running yet? All right, well, may not be having the PowerPoint, so we'll just go ahead and make it quick and swing through it.
Just though, I think it's a good idea to do just an overview of what the whole public utilities does. Just quick guess, if anybody can guess, how much mileage is in the city of Raleigh for sewer right now? Does anybody have no guesses? What about manholes? Total manhole counts. Have y'all gone?
I'll give you a hint. There's a lot of them.
So there is 2,500 miles of sewer line, 1,009 miles of pipe are located outside the right-of-way, and there are 68,000 manholes within the system. We have, 7 inspectors right now?
7.
So imagine 7 inspectors are pretty much going through the whole city of Raleigh. We tend to divide it in different ways, but we're out there, we're checking the manholes, making sure that they are correctly, there's no issues with them, spotting if there are any issues that we can prevent from happening. So that's pretty much what me and Jack do on a day-to-day. So it's just a thought to see when you're going on the road, you can start counting them if you want.
So next I'm going to talk about a little bit about our environmental management system. A lot of people don't really think about the sewer because it's obviously under the ground, and if you do smell it, then there's an issue or something like that. So it's easily forgettable. But one of our major roles is protecting all of our streams, and obviously protecting the environment is a big part of what we do. Back in 2015, we just recently became certified. We have an ISO cert now, ISO 14001. That's a pretty cool thing because most sewer systems don't have that certification, so you can be proud in the city of Raleigh that we have one of the best sewer systems in the entire world, basically. This ISO cert, I appreciate that, Shaw. So in order to maintain this ISO cert every year, we have to lay an environmental framework. That involves mandatory inspections over certain high priority lines. We have a system in place for operation and maintenance, prevention of pollution. We have a new GIS system called CityWorks that we use to manage all of our assets. So every single main, every single easement, every single manhole is all trackable. It's just a click away, and we can find out any information on it just about any time. So that's something that's pretty exciting and that we're all pretty proud of with public utilities.
I'll just mention some kind of type of divisions you may also see around your area or around the city. There are 3 main sewer maintenance operations. One of them is repairs. You guys may see them, in doing washouts, banks, stabilizing banks with rock. They're the ones that usually have the heavy equipment. We have preventative and reactive maintenance. Those are the huge flush trucks that you guys might have seen. There are great, huge flush trucks everywhere. What me and Jack are, we're easement inspections. Again, just going going through neighborhoods, checking, making sure that everything's okay, writing notes, reports, work orders, things like that. CCTV inspections, those are the guys who actually put the camera through the line, make sure that everything's all right. Easement maintenance, think of it, the ones cutting through the trees and making sure that the lines are properly in case there's a lot of vegetation, things like that. And fats, oils, and grease. Typically for neighborhoods, you'll see them, but they're usually around for restaurants and things like that. So those are some of our big maintenance operations that you will encounter here and there.
We have a slight demonstration, and since we're from the sewer department, you know you weren't making through this without some sort of toilet humor. So a big part of our community outreach, two of the major problems in our sewer system are fats, oils, and grease. Fats obviously turn solid, so when you pour them down the drain, they immediately turn solid down the pipe. They cause major clogs and things like that. Secondly is flushable wipes. A lot of people don't know they're actually not flushable. Those things do a lot of damage to our system, so we just like to let everybody know to properly dispose of your grease and also properly dispose of those wipes. So this is how a sewer is supposed to flow. We had a hard time collecting that sample. Now a sewer main that's going to be clogged with fats, oils, and grease, it sticks to the walls of it. So as you can see, it just gets really hard and it really restricts the flow. Also, if you're pouring grease down, we can put cameras down and we can follow the trail of grease back to your house. So don't do that, we'll find out. Once this is over at the end, we have a bunch of literature at the table over here. It's just some good information about how to kind of maintain your own system. It also provides phone numbers with the various departments of the city if you have any issues like that. So I guess we'll take a second. If anybody has any questions, we'll do the best we can to answer. All right, yes, back there.
So I've heard some talk recently about repair replacement schedules that are used by the department. And I'm wondering if you could shed a little light on what the current repair replacement schedule is. Is it on an as-needed basis, or is it automatically going and putting in new pipe after it becomes a certain age? What does that look like?
Pretty much they repair as needed to be, or excuse me, they replace as needed to be replaced. We have a capital improvement project program, and they're responsible for all the new sewer mains that are going to be put in the ground. But as far as everything that's currently in the ground, we just keep inspecting it. We have cameras, we have all kinds of instruments that we could use. So we're constantly tracking it throughout the year, and then as we sort of collect data on each individual main, then we sort of know where the problem areas are, and then that's how we use to go back to schedule our repairs.
So I'm with the administration, and obviously we got our wires crossed here because this was two presentations. But I'm going to go over that very, very quickly. Early hint, we're replacing about 5.5% of the pipe that we have in the ground. So 2,400 miles of water line, 2,400 miles of sewer line. The replacement rate is about 17 miles a year. The recommended replacement rate for pipe that has anywhere from 60 to 100 years of life is 1 to 1.6. So we're about half to a third of where we really want to be in terms of replacing it and getting a full replacement in 100 years. Right now, we're going to get everything replaced in 200 to 300 years. Unfortunately, the pipes is only going to last 60 to 100.
Oh, actually, yeah, that's awesome. Anything else before we head out?
Well, next time you guys see us in your neighborhood, we'll probably be by. Usually we have a vest on, hat. This has done a lot during the pollen season, as you see. It's dirty and everything. But yeah, typically if we are inspecting, we do, if there's fences or if there's things that we don't want to freak everyone out, we knock on doors, make sure that it's okay, or what we're doing is passing through and just inspecting it for like 2 minutes, walking by. But yeah, if you guys see us, that's pretty much the idea. Anybody else?
One quick question.
Yes.
So apparently inside the belt line there are a lot of clay pipes. I don't know if they're water or sewer.
Sewer.
Sewer?
Yes, ma'am.
Is there any concern about increased density in that area and putting any kind of increased demand on those clay pipes?
Yes, and I have a little bit of that to discuss in the presentation. So I'll put that in the parking lot. And I'll get these guys to help me out here. We've got a few things that we want to share. The first thing we want to share is, Mike, the second thing we want to share is we have a few items that we want you to feel comfortable going home with. One is a card, and it's self-addressed back to us, stamped. And anything that you have more questions about, other questions in public utilities in general, other presentations that you'd like in more detail, we would like you to fill it out and send it our way, and we'll come back and answer it. The guys here are going to step out in the audience, and anybody who wants one, go ahead and raise your hand. How am I doing as far as sound back there? I need to grab one of them up.
Thank you, guys.
All right. I remember starting out in the business about 24 years ago doing very much what these guys do today. And they're here today to introduce themselves because, yeah, we get out into the world and we do walk in your backyards in established easements to inspect that 2,400 miles of sewer line. So they want you to know what they're doing, and they're there for the good of the entire system. I want you to know that I'm going to rush through this presentation as quickly as I can. And I'm going to have these guys here keep an eye on me. No more than 10, right? No more than 10. Pull the plug. But what I'd like to do is introduce or reintroduce your public utilities department. So our friends here are part of that very large organization. Over $239 million in terms of budget. 665 positions, I believe we have, 656 positions this year. It's an incredibly large undertaking, and we serve not just the city of Raleigh, but 6 other communities. The towns of Knightdale, Wendell, Zebulon, Roseville, Wake Forest, and Garner that came over in a large regional merger. We serve 570,000 of your neighbors. We probably get another 100,000 drive in over time to work and play in our service area. So, a few quick takeaways. I'm going to use some acronyms very quickly. I'm going to use MGD, million gallons a day, because I want you to get some perspective on the size of your utility. We produce 50 million gallons a day. That's 63.5 pull-and-park pools a day that are used by you and your neighbors and the industry and the commerce around you, and then is discharged back to that very large sanitary sewer system that these gentlemen inspect and maintain, and is collected at very large regional wastewater treatment plants for treatment and safe discharge back to the environment. Who are our customers? Well, 92% of our customers, and we've got about 200,000 connections, 570,000 people, and 92% of them are residential, leaving only about 8% for all other types of uses, commercial, institutional, industrial. Our residents are using 63% of that 50 million gallons a day. We have very large wastewater treatment facilities and water treatment facilities, a few that I'll quickly point out. The E.M. Johnson Water Treatment Plant, now 51 years old, up to the north, using Falls Lake as a water source. I turn 48 on Monday, so I can tell you after 35 things start breaking down, and that is true of our water treatment facilities. This large regional water treatment facility is undergoing massive renovations in terms of investment and reinvestment of infrastructure that was installed before I was born. We have a wastewater treatment facility, a large wastewater treatment facility to the south, the Neuse River Resource Recovery Facility. It's also manned 24 hours. And then we have a couple of smaller wastewater treatment facilities. The Swift Creek Wastewater Treatment Facility, which we acquired from the town of Wake Forest. The Zebulon Little Creek Facility, which we acquired from the town of Zebulon. And the Wren Road Wastewater Treatment Facility, which we acquired from the town of Garner. Neat things. This is that aging but still robust facility up at on Falls of the Neuse Road. A lot of great things go on here. We bring clean drinking water from the lake, which does have its challenges, admittedly, and we distribute that through water distribution systems that are massive in size, and we deliver it to your tap. Here's an aerial of a newer water treatment facility This is the D.E. Benton Water Treatment Facility, constructed in the 2010 time frame, and we've returned to a couple of lakes that you, as our customers, own to the south, Lakes Benson and Wheeler. Here's that large wastewater treatment facility. Actually, we call it a resource recovery facility because we don't just treat wastewater. We collect the biosolids from that wastewater, we render them safe, and then we safely reuse them on farm fields. We capture reclaimed water, which is the water that we'd normally discharge, and we bring that back and we pump it to parts of the city, and it's used for non-potable uses. We have a farming operation. We raise sunflowers. Anybody heard of the sunflowers? Well, the neat thing about them is, beyond the fact that they're beautiful, they're incredibly useful because we harvest them and we turn them into our biofuels for our farm equipment. So we have our own refinery at this facility to refine biofuels. How am I doing, guys? Not bad? Close to time. So let's blow on through this. Who likes Las Vegas? Everybody likes Las Vegas, right? Well, in Vegas, there's this really neat hotel called the Bellagio. And it has 8 acres of fountains that hold 22 million gallons a day. And we have enough pipe in the ground to deliver to Bellagio twice as much water as it needs and bring it back for treatment when it's done. Just to put it in perspective of how large your system is. Big point that we want to get across, and this gets to your question about clay pipe. Infrastructure. Infrastructure in the nation in general is in decline. It's only the most visible infrastructure, like this transportation infrastructure, that people are seeing. But when our infrastructure runs to failure, what we have is large wastewater spills or large potable water line breaks that will block Capitol Boulevard on the busiest time of the morning for anybody who's experienced that. And we have a relatively mixed system. We have young pipe here in green. So this is a map of the system. Young pipe in green. As it ages up into red, it gets older and older. And as you could tell, the older pipe is in neighborhoods like this one and in the downtown areas. And that pipe, we have some pipe downtown that's 130 years old. Ductile iron pipe has an anticipated lifetime of 75 to 100 years. So we're running beyond the anticipated life of that pipe, which is good, right? Pipes are like people. Some of them last longer than others, right? Some of them have taken better care of themselves than others. But the big takeaway is we do have a lot of infrastructure that needs to be categorized, classified. We need to understand how critical it is to the day-to-day operations of the entire system and what condition is it in. So we have an asset management program that robustly goes out and it looks for failing sanitary sewer lines, and we are using robotic cameras to look in some of our largest water lines for the purpose of looking at them and seeing, all right, are they ready to age out? And in fact, we've discovered some of those large water lines. One example is on Hillsborough Street that had aged out. It was installed in the 70s. It was not a very good type of pipe, and it was ready to fail. It was also 36 inches wide and would have released millions of gallons of water washing out roadways and who knows what else. So we got in there in front of it and we discovered its condition and then spent our time replacing the most critical infrastructure that is in the poorest condition. So I'll leave you with a couple thoughts. How big is your system? 2,400 miles? 2,400 miles? $2 billion of infrastructure above ground, about 3 times that amount below ground. I want you to see where some of your dollars are going real quickly. This is a graph of what our expenditures have been over the last 9-10 years. In blue is operations, so that's folks like myself and these guys here are doing the day-to-day operation and maintenance. In orange is what's called pay-as-you-go infrastructure replacement. So that's money we collect last year, and we put it aside for pipes this year. And then in the pinkish reddish color, that's bond money. So something that is so large, something that is not necessarily a replacement project, that we go out and we borrow money and we pay back interest and that money over time to replace the infrastructure. As you can see, our operation costs have been pretty flat over the last 10 years, about 2% over that time frame in growth. The real cost increase have gone into that infrastructure replacement. And yes, there are pipes in downtown Raleigh which are not properly sized for the development that's coming their way. We do have plans and projects of which the development community are participating in to replace those pipes. But there's also pipes in neighborhoods like this one, which are sized adequately, but they're elderly, and it's time to get in front of them and replace them in an orderly manner before gentlemen like this on the water side have to come out in the middle of the night and dig down and make a repair, and then a couple of weeks later make another repair, and then several months later make a third repair. That's what we're trying to do, is to get in front of that failure cycle. So, I'm going to blow right on through here and leave you with this last graphic. It's my favorite graphic. Our director put this together, and it really puts it in context for me. The water that you can purchase for home delivery is $8.33 a gallon. If you want to buy it in the grocery store, depending on the size of the container, it's anywhere from $1 to $6. The water we deliver to your home and then take away is 1.5 cents a gallon, or $1.88 a day. So that's the investment that we're making into your infrastructure, is we're wanting to make sure that we can continue to do that and do that for a reasonable price. So with that being said, I know I went long. Questions? So the question is, are we keeping ahead of the building in downtown Raleigh, and what's its downtown Raleigh? We have what's called an urban main replacement policy. What we do is, if a developer comes in and they need to connect to our system and the system's undersized, they pay to replace that infrastructure. If that infrastructure is old, we will reimburse them some of the value of the age of that pipe. And if we need that pipe to be slightly larger, we'll pay to increase its size, and then we'll charge the next developer who connects development fees to reimburse ourselves for that oversizing. Coming up on a future council agenda is the culmination of 11 years of work for our director and others, where we have arranged to acquire more water in Falls Lake, about 22 million gallons to be exact. And it'll carry us through 2047. So yes, we will have plenty of water through that time frame. But we've worked on it for over 11 years to get there.
According to the slide, you need to charge more for your water.
Next question. He said we need to charge more for our water. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'll meet you out in the parking lot. You get $20 later. Sir. There was in eastern Wake County, and there still is plans on the books to build that reservoir when we need it. But we found an existing water source. We actually bargained with the federal government to acquire more storage in Falls Lake. We're acquiring it for about $23-24 million. That's about an order of magnitude less than the $300 million the new reservoir would have been as of today's dollars. So yes, there's land out there and there's plans for a reservoir, but we're going with the highest, best use of our dollars right now. Ma'am? Well, there's several terms here that we need to be sure we understand. So gray water is like dishwater that people can utilize, and there are building codes that are available in terms of sustainability where property owners can reuse their gray water, the safe gray water. We also provide what's known as reclaimed water, and we have a distribution system that's designed to go to some of our largest users so we can offset their use. It's not cost effective to put it in neighborhoods, so we're taking it to where we have the highest and best use of that water for the lowest cost to put it there. I need a hook. I need a hook.
The state government has a pretty big presence downtown. Can you talk about their contribution to the sewer system, especially as it relates to the legislature?
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I didn't get your name earlier.
Kenny Waldrop.
Kenny Waldrop. Okay, that was Kenny Waldrop from the Department of Water. Thank you so much. That was very nice. And I'm sorry to ask you to speed through that, but I think you got all your points across.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Jason, you have mine, or do you need to get one back? Okay. We'll borrow this back from you, if you don't mind. And you guys need the projector?
Yes.
Okay. Is this the cities? This isn't yours personally, Kenny.
It's the cities.
It is the cities. Okay. So thanks for that. So guys, we're going to move over to character protection, neighborhood protection. And I want to just set the tone for this before we jump into it. There has been some misunderstanding, I think, out on next door. We are not voting on anything tonight. We are not trying to influence anybody to any position tonight. There are a number of neighborhoods who have asked, what is available, what are the tools that are available to me? So we have two representatives from the city who are going to explain NCODs, neighborhood conservation overlays, is one of the tools, and then historic, basically historic district protection, which has a few flavors. So if you think we're here for a vote, we're not. I just want to set that clear. I know this is a very touchy subject for some people, so tonight is really an information session to get the information out to everybody. If you have a position for your neighborhood one way or another, that's for you to address at your neighborhood level. Okay? We're not discussing any specific neighborhoods here tonight. I realize it's touchy. But this is just all about getting facts out about what the city programs are. Okay?
Question before you start.
Uh-huh.
How do we get it on the neighborhood level? Because our neighborhood is already, with very few people, pushed it through to stage 5 with the majority of the neighborhood not even knowing. We've asked for a meeting and we've been told that we're not getting it. You're here. Can you repeat the question? I said, I asked, can you tell us how we can get a neighborhood meeting? Because many of us here are probably from the supposed Anderson Heights fiasco. And some of our neighbors pushed this ahead for 3 years. We're supposedly at stage 5 where there's going to be a study. We have specifically asked to have a meeting with the 139 affected households and have been told that we're not getting a meeting, that the study is moving forward.
Is that something you're going to cover?
How is that fair? Where's our neighborhood meeting now that we're all aware of what's going on? So,
Thank you. I don't know the answer to your question, but I think part of what, maybe we can ask Tanya, I'm sure you will go over what the process is. I don't know what stage 5 is, but you should be made aware, obviously, if somebody is having that conversation in your neighborhood. And usually neighborhoods put out notices to the impacted neighborhood. I don't know your specific situation, but Tanya, if you could address what's the process when you get there.
well,
And then we can
I guess
follow up
most
with
of us
questions.
probably are here saying we want a meeting. We want it before the study gets started.
Okay, do you know who the people are in your neighborhood who are,
Why don't you ask? Can we just raise our hands this here for the Anderson Heights overlay?
okay, you're for Anderson Heights, okay. presentations, get the information out, and it sounds like you obviously have a very specific community-specific issue. If we have time at the end, then you can ask questions of the city folks about what to do and where are they in the process. Okay? I don't know any other way to handle it. We can't make this an Anderson Heights only meeting. I appreciate you guys being here. But the point is to get the information out to you about what tools are available. Okay? All right, so let's start. Jason, I think you need to use both. If you don't, you could put one in the pocket and use that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How's this for back there as well? Okay, great. So I'm Jason Harden with the Department of City Planning, and we're going to talk a lot about the process of our character protection overlay districts, and in a very general sense. It sounds like a lot of people are here for a specific reason. That's great. Hope this is still of interest to everyone, and I want to encourage everyone. There may be questions about this presentation and about what Tanya's going to talk about with historic overlays. If we can just hold all those questions until the end, and then we can take those jointly once we finish. So to talk about the NCOD, Neighborhood Conservation Overlay District, it's an extra layer of zoning, essentially. So all properties in the city have a base zoning, and although we usually think about those being applied to properties as they developed, in a lot of cases, zoning was applied as areas were annexed or after they had already developed. And so that process was pretty rough. It was taking a look at what was in the area and applying a pretty broad category. How many units per acre, maybe a little bit about setbacks, and that was it. What the neighborhood conservation overlay districts do is provide a much more customized layer of land use regulation on top of that base zoning. And so zoning can talk about density, lot size, particularly uses. That's a big part of zoning. The NCODs get much more detailed, not about use, but about the built characteristics of a neighborhood, about height, about frontage, setbacks, things like that. And I'll go through some examples of the kind of things that they typically have addressed. So it's a pretty extensive process for an NCOD. And there are a couple dozen that exist in the city of Raleigh. Only one has gone through in the last several years or so. And it's not something that happens quickly. It's not something that happens without a lot of meetings and conversation. And it's not something that happens by code requirement with a lot of buy-in from the affected residents, property owners. So the first step would be a petition, and this is coming from a resident and saying, we're interested in this extra overlay. Often it's coming because people have concerns about the type of recent development or activity in their neighborhood, and they're looking for some kind of tool to address that. And that petition has some specific requirements that have to be met for it to move to the next part of this process. It has to contain some study area boundaries, and it has to talk about what specifically they would like the NCOD to cover. And there's a pretty wide list of things, but it's not anything under the sun. There's certain code-stated issues that can be addressed, and anything beyond that cannot be. So once there's that concept, there are a couple of pretty rigorous requirements that have to be met. One is there has to be 15 contiguous acres of land. And the other is that 75% of lots are developed. And then finally, and this is where a lot of that conversation comes in, has to be signed by a majority of property owners in that area. So just to get to that point of a petition that could be presented to council, that's going to require pretty obviously a lot of conversations, a lot of meetings. It's not just one person saying, let's run with this, and then it starts to happen. There have been a lot of efforts that have gotten to a certain point, and the support just wasn't there. So assuming that it gets to that point, the next step is to present that to council, and then council can authorize a study of the area according to those specific built characteristics. And again, I'll talk about examples of those that are desired to be regulated for that area. Assuming that study goes forward and then is presented back to council, and council agrees that there should be the next step. The study would be done, and council would decide on that next step. That would be to authorize a change to the development code that would put those new regulations in the code. And at that point, there still is one more hurdle to clear for this to be applied, and that would be to actually rezone those properties to apply those new regulations. And that also requires a petition and a process on its own. So it's a roughly a year-long or so process, give or take a few months. It's not something that happens very quickly. So I've talked a couple times about what kind of things the study can consider, what does it look at, and I'll go through some examples of that. So one would be one of the most basic and probably one that I think is in every NCOD. It's certainly in most of them. It's one of the basics. It's lot size. That could be minimum lot size. It could be we want lots to be larger. It could be maximum lot size. We want them to be not larger than a certain amount. Could be lot width. That's going to be obviously pretty closely correlated to lot size, but it's not exactly the same thing. It would depend on the depth of the lot. So that could be a separate characteristic that could be regulated. Setbacks is another very common one. So it could be the primary street setback for a house. That's the distance between the street right away or the property line and then the primary building itself. It could be side street setbacks. It could be side setbacks in between buildings. It could be rear setbacks. It could be setbacks relating to accessory structures. There's any number of ways that this can be and has been applied. Could be building height. That's another pretty common one. Something that in some neighborhoods we hear a lot about. That could be height in terms of feet, measured from the average grade of the front. It could be height in terms of stories. It could be both. Other possible, again, there's a set list that is specified by code. Other considerations could be the locations of entrances, could be residential density, which is obviously pretty closely tied to lot size, but it's not exactly the same thing. Vehicular surface areas, so the location of parking beside buildings, behind buildings, location of driveways. Building placement on the lot, again, that's similar to setbacks, but in some cases it could include a build to. The building should not be further than a certain distance from the right-of-way, and distances between buildings. So this is an example of a process where the study has been taking place. In the middle of this process, it's in North Raleigh. And what is looked for in the study is what the code calls the predominant character. And that means it's shared by most of, doesn't have to be all of the properties in the area, but essentially more than 75%. So in this case, there were 41 properties in this particular study. So to reach that, it would have to be at least 30. If half of them have some characteristic and half don't, then it's hard to define that as really an overwhelming predominant character. So this is an example of, and there's a whole lot of numbers from these studies. This is just one example of lot size, just to walk through and give you an idea of what that looks like. So the smallest lot in this area that was studied was 13,000 square feet, so actually a pretty large lot, almost a third of an acre. The largest was 30,000 square feet. The average was 29,000, and more than 75% were larger than 19,000 square feet. So that was determined to be, in terms of lot size, the predominant character of that particular area. So in that case, or in any other case where a study gets to that point, the next step would be that it's back in council's court after they receive the results of the study, and they can then authorize the text change that would incorporate these standards into the code. And then again, once that happens, there still would be the need to actually rezone those properties to apply that code. It is, again, by design, it's one extra step that's required in that process. That rezoning would, again, have to require a majority of property owners to initiate, and then the final decision would be council. So just to give you a couple of ideas of some somewhat different NCOD regulations, the top one here is Laurel Hills, and it includes a minimum lot size of about half an acre, has a minimum lot frontage of 45 feet, lot width a little bit further back of 100 feet, has a pretty deep front yard setback, 50 feet. That's pretty far compared to a lot of neighborhoods in the city. Maximum building height of 35 feet. And then to contrast a little bit, Mordecai has a couple of these. This is an example of one of them. Has a much smaller minimum lot size, 7,000 square feet. Includes a maximum lot size. Includes a minimum lot width of 50, front yard setback a little bit closer to the street, 35 feet, and also has that maximum building height of 35 feet. So that's all I have in terms of a presentation. I'm sure there may be some questions about that process, and I'm happy to take those. I do think it'll be helpful to hear from Tanya on historic overlay districts, and we can take questions jointly at the end, because there may be questions that have to do with really both of these or one or the other, and we can trade off and answer those. There are approximately 20 or so. That's correct. It's not very common. I think you could see that the process is pretty involved, and there have been many more conversations about them than there are effective NCODs, because there's a lot of consensus that's required in that process, and it's not always there. So once those conversations start to happen, sometimes that consensus emerges and sometimes it doesn't. North Hills, that's right, is an NCOD. That's right. So they're both what's called character protection districts, but a little bit different in the process and a little bit different in how they work. And I think it'd be helpful to hear from Tanya at this point.
Glenwood Brooklyne's a historic overlay district, whereas North Hills is the NCOD. First of all, I want to thank you, Carol, for inviting. Sorry, the mic. Okay, point.
That was my fault. I left an extra mic back for you, Travis. Sorry, I should have brought that back up.
I'm a girl. We don't have pockets. All right. Here this evening, and also I think I was realizing the last time we spoke on the subject was 2015. So yeah, glad to talk about historic overlay districts again. And as I go through the process, I will address some of the questions I think that came up at the beginning. Make sure I'm understanding this. And I am Tanya Tully with the Department of City Planning. The Historic Preservation Unit is in the Urban Design Center, and there are 3 of us on staff now, and we also staff the Raleigh Historic Development Commission. So you tend to hear about us affiliated with both the city and our HDC. It is the same thing. So in my presentation, generally speaking, I'm going to go over what is an historic overlay district, what do they do generally, how they happen, what the process is, and then towards the end go into a little bit more of what they do as far as the design review process. And that's why we're here tonight. It's all about character preservation, similar to NCODs. It's just a different one of our tools. Historic Overlay District is another zoning overlay. It is intended to protect the historic character of a district that has special significance in terms of archaeology, architecture, history, culture, and has integrity of design and architecture. I'll go through that later on. And that protection is achieved through a design review process. And I'll talk about later that there are 2 flavors, I like that, of historic overlay district. So unlike the Neighborhood Conservation Overlay District, where you heard a lot of numbers and it's very quantitative, historic overlay districts protect character through a design review process, and there are design guidelines, but it is more qualitative in that review because it is context-based depending on the particular neighborhood. Oberlin Village has a different character from Boylan Heights, different from Oakwood, etc. And it protects, also there's a demolition delay possibility, as well as it discourages demolition by neglect. It does not change the underlying zoning. It does not affect use. We have residential historic overlay districts. We have primarily commercial, such as Moore Square, and we have some that are mixed character. Prince Hall is a good example, and some of even our residential neighborhoods have a sprinkling of commercial uses throughout. It doesn't eliminate the need to comply with other building codes. It does not deny demolition. It doesn't require changing things back to the way they were. It only looks at things moving forward. So what does a historic overlay district regulate? It regulates exterior changes to a property. The two different flavors regulate different portions of the property. And it doesn't look at use, lot size, no interior changes. What does a historic overlay district mean for property owners? And I do want to acknowledge that, you know, when a neighborhood starts looking at a historic overlay district, it is very personal. It is something that requires a lot of decisions. Some of these facts that some people may consider them positive, some of them may consider them negative, you know, depending on what the particular issue is. The main thing it does is it offers predictability. We like to refer to it as managed change. There's not a freezing in time of neighborhood, but it is looking at the change. There is the certificate of appropriateness process, which is how that has happened. There is a potential increase in property values. The city and RHDC funded a study back in 2014 that looked at, among other factors, the economic value of historic overlay districts and National Register historic districts in the city of Raleigh. And one of the things that was found that one of the things that the study in 2014 found is that, and that's why I put there's a potential increase, that based on the numbers through 2008, that there was an increase compared with the city of Raleigh as a whole. What does it mean to the neighborhood? And both of those sort of tie together, individuals and neighborhood, is that it tends to reduce speculative demolitions. It is the one tool for small properties that can help preserve tree canopy. It allows for public input on major changes to properties, and like I said before, it manages change. We pulled demolition permits that are available publicly from 2002 through 2018, and those and found that of them, I didn't put the whole. Yeah, well, I only put them what I've got more detail. Anyway, for the last year, we pulled all of them. The percentages are about the same, but from 2017 to 2018, of the 511 demolition permits that were issued, you had far fewer in historic overlay districts than you did in neighborhood conservation overlay districts, as well as in National Register historic districts. The process of review is called a Certificate of Appropriateness, or COA. You'll hear a little bit more about that later. There are two levels of review. There's a staff level, and there is also what most folks have heard about, what we call the major work that goes to the Raleigh Historic Development Commission at an evidentiary hearing. The certificates of appropriateness are reviewed through a design review process using design guidelines. Each historic district has what we call a special character essay that goes along with the historic designation report that aids staff and the commission in reviewing proposed changes. Again, each neighborhood has a different character, so applications are reviewed on an individual case-by-case basis, and work in lovely language must not be congruent. It must be not congruous. In other words, it must be compatible with the district. From a statistical standpoint, in the last 10 years, we've reviewed roughly 1,900 certificates of appropriateness, with the majority of them being approved by staff, others by RHDC, and with 1% of them being denied. That doesn't quite add up to 100 because we have some that were deferred and never heard again and some that were withdrawn as well. Briefly, there are two types of historic overlay districts, the two flavors. There is the general historic overlay district, which is most of them. That is what I think a lot of people are more familiar with. I've listed them there, Oakwood being the first one, Oberlin Village being the newest one that was just enacted in February of this year. And the other is the Street Side Historic Overlay District, and right now we only have one, that's Glenwood, Brooklyn. The ability to have a street side came into effect in, I think it was the 2013 change in the Unified Development Ordinance. And the intent of that is to have a historic overlay district that is not regulating the entire property. The focus is on what is visible from the street, and only part of the area of the property is regulated. And again, I go into that a little bit more at the end. So the process, and this diagram, it is now available up on the website. We've, I think the first checklist that we had available didn't have the arrows on there, but there are a number of steps towards getting a historic overlay district. It's not a short process. It starts with the neighborhood. Well, it starts with somebody who's interested, moves to the neighborhood. You end up working with staff and the Raleigh Historic Development Commission, and then City Council before you even get to a rezoning process at all. This is just to get to the point, and I'll go through each of these. So it starts with some neighborhood group. We've chosen for the moment to call them organizers. And our recommendation is that a neighborhood form a committee and to meet with staff and just learn about what is this HOD generally. Over the last few years, we've met with a handful of groups, some of which we hear from again, some of which we never hear from. I think we're here tonight in part because of some folks that we met with and said, okay, we're not sure if we want an HOD or we want an NCOD. You know, but let's get the information out there more broadly. And we encourage folks to talk to the property owners and get a feel for what is the concern in your neighborhood. Every neighborhood has a different feeling for what is their character and what do they care about. Is it the tear downs? Is it just what goes back? Is it the trees? That is something that you talk about amongst yourselves and then come forward with. And in talking with staff, then we give you an idea of whether or not a neighborhood may or may not even be eligible or have the potential to move forward at all. Which is we get into the historic district requirements. So where I talked about having special significance in history, architecture, culture, and I hate this word, but integrity of design, setting, materials, feeling, and association. In short, that means if the original owner were to, come back today or still be here today, depending on the case, would they recognize it? Does it still look like the neighborhood when it was constructed? And sometimes that's over time. Some neighborhoods are built in a short period of time. Others, for example, Oakwood, was built over a long period of time, its development going through the 1930s, even though it started in the late 1800s. So what is eligible? What could potentially be a historic district? What I call the easy button is if it's already a National Register historic district, and that is a lot of 5 points. I think it was 2002 when much of the area around 5 points, there were individual districts that were listed in the National Register. So in some cases, that would be an example of what happened with Glenwood, Brooklyn. It was already a National Register historic district, And so any additional work, the additional work that was done on that, it needed to be updated to reflect what had happened from the time it was listed in the National Register until 2 years ago when they were requesting designation. There are districts that have been determined eligible through the to be eligible for the National Register. And without going into that process, specifically the State Historic Preservation Office keeps a list. They have a process of getting things listed, and so there are districts and individual properties that have been studied that they said, okay, probably they're going to be eligible if somebody ever does a report. And then there are some areas that are not eligible for the National Register, but still may meet the criteria in the code for becoming a local historic district, having special significance and integrity. Overland Village, our most recent district, is an example of that. And that is where Anderson Heights falls in. The easy button with the National Register historic districts is when you're going out and you're talking to neighbors, you already have a base. It hasn't been looked at again since, I think it might have been 2005 that they were listed, 4 or 5. But so it's been 10, 12 years since they were listed, so we haven't looked at what change there has happened. But at least there's a base understanding of what's on the ground, what's the age of the buildings, what are their descriptions, and not every district has that. The other piece, yes, ma'am.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just wanted to mention the notebooks that I passed around at the beginning of the meeting are the application for the 5 Points neighborhoods to the National Register. So when Tanya's speaking about that kind of work and survey, those are examples in the books that are going around for specific neighborhoods.
Yeah, and those National Register nomination reports are also available on the Commission's website. Under the historic districts, we've linked to the state. They should all be there, but our website is slowly breaking, so let us know if it doesn't actually work. In addition, one of the mission of the Historic Preservation Unit and the Raleigh Historic Development Commission is to identify, preserve, protect, and promote Raleigh's historic resources. And as part of that identification is we keep an architectural inventory, and we've done them every 10 years or so, starting in I think the earliest one might have been in 72, and we do them periodically, and we just completed one this last year and presented to the Raleigh Citizens Advisory Council the results of that. And in studies like that, we identify neighborhoods that just in a quick reconnaissance survey, a brief look by an architectural historian, from a visual standpoint, there's some cohesiveness there. There might be a district that's worthy of further study. And in the case of Anderson Heights, a group of folks hired an architectural historian to do the a separate version of that for Anderson Heights. And so it's a very minimal piece, but a further report has not yet been done. And I'll go into more about what a district report contains. So after meeting with staff, the neighborhood group would then have some information that they would then, and hopefully have some understanding about what a historic district is and if that's what they want to pursue, or if they're interested in neighborhood conservation overlay district, they will then work with other staff and move in that direction. And at that point, at some point, we have a neighborhood meeting to share information such as this and about what a historic overlay district is, what it means, the COA process, and then demonstrate some level of support in order to do a report. And then these two sort of squish together a little bit. The funding and preparation of a historic designation report It can be self-funded. That's highly unusual because they are not, most folks don't have extra pocket money, but the other option is to use city funding. The city council over the last couple of budgets have provided funding to allow for neighborhoods that have come forward to request a historic overlay district potential report. And so they talk with Raleigh Historic Development Commission staff. And the historic overlay district requirements includes this report. A report is a written description of all the buildings. It is a photograph of every building, from the streets. There's a study, a written narrative of the history of the neighborhood, a written description of the physical, are there sidewalks, are there a lot of trees, are there no sidewalks, undulating roads, are there, what's the general characteristic of the neighborhood, in addition to an inventory of every specific building. And then there's also a boundary analysis. And usually there's a boundary that is started with somehow based on sort of this quick drive-through, looking at plats. Architectural historians use that. And then what's on the ground. Boundary development is, the idea is to come up with a concentration of the buildings that have maintained the integrity, trying not to use jargon, it's not going to work, are considered contributing to a historic district, meaning that they were built in the time period of the district and they maintain that integrity. The owner would come by and they would recognize it. And when you get to a point as you're driving down the street, all of a sudden you have either 2 new houses, 3 new houses, or 2 or 3 houses in a row that have been altered such that they're no longer considered contributing. That's when you start, drawing the boundary lines. And so that is for Anderson Heights. The study list report that was done by Ruth Little created the boundaries where you were talking about the 139 people, that is where those came from. And then there's a report. So the investigation and report is neighborhood initiated, and then it is prepared by an architectural historian, and then the results are presented to the Raleigh Historic Development Commission. In the creation of the report, whenever we've done these, the first thing that we do is we hold a meeting with the neighborhood and introduce the architectural historian to talk about what he or she would be doing, the fact they're not going on your property, but that fact they'll be around taking pictures. I'm thinking, and I do need to, this has not been decided certainly, but my thought is that given the additional interest that we have, is that we may want to do a combo meeting, starting off with, hello, meet the architectural historian, and then if we can answer additional questions specifically. The one thing I do want to say is that getting an architectural report done, whether you call it a designation report or not, does not mean there will be a historic district. From the standpoint of the city and the Raleigh Historic Development Commission, doing architectural reports, even if there is not a historic designation as a result, is valuable information that we are gathering on the history and development of Raleigh. It enables us to help tell the story. It does not mean there will definitely be a district. It doesn't mean there will even be an application made. That is really going to be up to the neighborhood, and if there is not support to move forward, it will not move forward.
But with regards to Anderson Heights, the study should not even move forward. The majority of the property owners were not even aware until April 14th that this was even being done behind our back. According to your own process, there should have been door-to-door conversations, there should have been neighborhood meetings. None of that has existed. We all found out April 14th. It all needs to stop here and start. We all deserve a voice before this study is even done. And
I'm sorry you did not know about it before the April 9th meeting. I'm not sure what happened to that. So in order to move forward, there were a couple things. One of it was, and I guess I am just going to answer the questions. I'm here. Is that the information from 2016 showed at that time approximately a third of people. I realize properties have changed hands, but because it had been long, we said, hey, we're going to have a meeting, and the idea behind the meeting on April 9th was to hear from folks. Apparently, we did not. At this point, we are moving forward with the.
There was a 2-year.
I understand that. I understand that. I don't want to get.
I know.
Okay.
I just want to say something, which is this. You can speak so that you can be heard, and you can listen so that you can hear what other people are saying. When people speak very aggressively, what happens is it creates a fight, flight, freeze response in other individuals. So some people are going to fight back, other people are going to leave, and other people are going to be frozen in place. The frozen in place people won't even be able to think. So when you speak aggressively, it doesn't give the opinion or the feeling that you really even want to listen.
Okay. It's okay.
We've sent emails and we've asked, and our voices are not being heard. So when are our voices going to be heard?
As far as, well, there will be multiple opportunities if this goes forward for your voice to be heard. At this point, the architectural report is moving forward, unless somebody else tells me otherwise. But at this point, I have spoken with everyone. We're going to do the report. Let's see. So back to where we were. So assuming that there has been a report, whether it's a brand new report or it's been an update to a National Register report, then that report is brought to the Raleigh Historic Development Commission, where they review it and make a vote on whether or not, after seeing the report, it really does qualify for a historic district. At that point, it is the neighborhood's responsibility to take that report and decide whether or not they're going to go to City Council and request that City Council instruct staff, well, I don't know, I'm pointing to me, staff, to file a zoning application. And that would be a public meeting at City Council where it is recommended, and what we have seen thus far is that City Council expects to have written signatures from at least 50% of the property owners that are in support. If that is not there, I've not seen City Council move forward. And in that case, we have a wonderful report, and we move on. Yes, ma'am.
Is there a notice requirement for them to provide us notice of these things occurring, and that we get a certain amount of time to actually be able to attend these things?
That's a good question. So the only legal notice is when we get into the rezoning process. The City Council meetings have fairly short notice, but one of the things that we try to do is provide, sort of general couple of weeks notice. I don't want to say like party planning, but that's generally the kind of thing. 2 to 3 weeks notice for the any informal public meetings that are happening. As far as City Council meetings, that would be the neighborhood to sort of keep track themselves on if a project page has been created. Then as soon as we know an item is going to go up on a council agenda, we would put it there. And the agenda for City Council doesn't usually show up. It's like a week before the meeting, something like that. Yes, ma'am.
Just speaking out for a few people here, I think that it's a little unfair that it has, I feel, already reached to stage 3 of 4, and we have not had proper notification about it. It's already moving towards City Council. It's already moving towards these signatures. we feel a bit bombarded by it.
And I
I
understand.
think that, no, I'm speaking. So I think that we are all, we talk about the neighborhood. I think most of this is our neighborhood. And we all stand firmly that there's only a few that want this historic overlay. And we need more information given to us, not in a flyer or the neon green that was sent to us. We need proper notification, not that we need to seek this out. This is life-changing information that will change the property value of our homes and the way that we live our lives and whether we're going to stay here or not. And I think that we need to be more informed upfront, very upfront about this sort of change.
Sure, and absolutely, and that after the report is completed, there will be another meeting, and then I think there will be multiple opportunities before it goes any further. I'm not sure how else I can reassure you that this is not on a definitive track moving forward, other than creating the report. I would like to now see if there's anybody that has any, well, hold on, let me see what else. Well, I was going to go into what a street side historic overlay district. I want to see if anybody has any questions about the NCOD or HOD process in general.
So what you're saying is the NCOD, you have to have 75% of the homeowners in agreement for that to move forward? I was a little confused on that.
Can you repeat the question?
Question is, what percentage of homeowners need to be, property owners need to be in agreement for it to move forward? So the 75% is about the built characteristics.
Okay.
The requirement for it to move forward is a majority.
And what is considered majority, like 50%?
So 50 plus 1. And obviously the higher that number is, the stronger that the move behind that would be.
So do we get to vote? We don't? How do we voice our support or not?
Are you referring to the proposed HOD or NCOD or just a general question?
Any of them.
How do you
Well,
determine the majority?
How do you
Right.
determine the majority?
Well, I can answer for an NCOD, and I think it's pretty similar, effectively, for an HOD. So it's the properties, and how many of the property owners sign that or not. So there's 50 properties.
It
If
doesn't matter if we sign or not sign.
right, the petition.
Over the internet.
So
how
if
do we vote?
there would be a petition. There would be a petition. So if there's 50 properties and 10 people in that area sign a petition, it couldn't move forward. If 40% of them, 40 people sign it, it could.
So who or where is the petition?
That would be up to citizens to create a petition and circulate it. Obviously, they would have an incentive if they want their process to be successful to talk to as many people as possible. If they only talk to 2 people and they have a district, that has 50 people, then clearly that couldn't meet the code requirement to proceed.
I have a question about that, and I think this might be part of why our neighborhood, Anderson Heights, is feeling kind of hot about this right now. I remember receiving a flyer asking if I appreciated the character of our neighborhood, liked the tree canopy, things like that. I remember getting one flyer, for sure. In retrospect, the way that I received that information and those questions was, do you like the character of your neighborhood? Yes, I love my neighbors. I love the way we all care about each other and the people in our neighborhood. And, the tree canopy is neither here nor there to me at this point in time, but I think that to people who maybe remember that and maybe don't, it feels like whether or not we responded to a different question than what was maybe being asked, if that makes sense.
It seems like it was deceitful because you're asking.
I don't think that it was with deceitful intent at all. I think, I disagree with that. I think that the people in Anderson Heights who started it because they love our neighborhood. And I think that those of us who are here tonight are here because we love our neighborhood. And what I hate to see about this, and what I think you're seeing people appearing very
will, I see who's here. I've heard your questions. I will be going back. I am not top man on the totem pole, but we all talk to each other, and I will share this information, like I said, unless told otherwise. Now, I will tell you that the request for qualifications has already gone out, but again, that even though I've been told to move forward with it, just if you see that, I will share what I heard tonight, I guess is what I'm trying to say. I am hearing you. I see how many people are here, and it looks like we have one. Well, I'll let you do it. You do it.
This live stream, and when y'all talk, they can hear you. So if you have a question, I'll walk around and pass around the mic, and we'll alternate sides here. Okay, we want them to hear what you're saying.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yep, they're good.
Really? Okay. I have a question about the process. The NCOD is very explicit about a petition and a vote and all that. I've got that. That's fine. But the slides for the historic overlay don't mention anything like that. So that's part of the confusion here, is that the process, is there a vote or is there not a vote among the neighborhood? It needs to be explicit in your slides.
In the code, there's nothing. The code doesn't even say there has to be more than 50%. But that is the way staff and the city and the Historic Development Commission have operated.
Right.
And
but I don't see
what
that.
We tried to.
It's not explicit in. It's very explicit in the NCOD.
We will work on trying to make it clearer. What you saw tonight is yet a clearer version than what we had out. I'll be perfectly honest, as I was putting together my slideshow, I realized, we should have added this here. So I apologize if that's not very clear, but we can make it clear. I think that I'm hearing where there are questions in what the steps are. I think with the NCOD, the code says you do this, that, and the other, and what we're trying to do is create steps in something that is a fairly fluid process.
Okay, but that's part of the reason that there's such an
that.
uproar, because there isn't a clearly defined series of steps that need to be taken, and that's part of the confusion.
Well, hold on. That's right. I'm not in charge of the mic.
Carol? Carol?
Please pass it on. Thank you.
You still have to talk loud. Apparently that's only for the computer.
I just want to say a few things. That I thank you for your feedback, and I agree. I think we all love our neighborhood. And I have been part of the effort of the Anderson Heights Study Group, and I will tell you that it was never done, in my impression and my involvement, meant to be an underhanded or not inclusive approach. And I'm sorry that you all feel that way, and I can certainly understand how you feel that way. So I understand that, and I've been on the other side too, where things have happened in the neighborhood where I have felt the way that you have. So I want to say that I'm very glad you all are here tonight, and the meeting that was held on April 9th, if it did nothing else, indirectly, it got you all informed and aware, and that's a great thing. And I'm appreciative of the people and the persons that have done that, because I think everyone in the effort wanted it to be an inclusive thing. And I will tell you personally, I had hopes that that meeting on April 9th, now it may not have been perfectly executed through the mail or for the postcard or whatever, but it was never meant to be non-inclusive. And thank you for coming out tonight and voicing your opinion. And I agree. I would like to see every one of you as neighbors and know that we all want the same thing, and we're all willing to live with how the majority speaks. So Tanya, I don't know what to say in terms of carrying this forward, but I think we all want everyone to be informed and everyone to be aware. And it was never the intention that you weren't. And I'm just speaking to tell you that's how I felt about the effort. So I'm sorry that it's come to this. It was never meant to come to this, but I appreciate all of you coming out tonight and speaking your mind and having your say. So thank you.
Sorry, guys, we have to share one mic here. So we'll try to go back and forth.
Hi, thank you it's nice to see you again. We've worked well together. Because the majority requirement is not in any of the code or documentation, do you count owners as being, say, 2 people who have their name on the property, or is it one property?
That's a very good question. That's one that Cameron Park is struggling with right now. It is up to each neighborhood as long as you're consistent and it's clear. If you're going to count each property, then count each property. If it's going to be each person on the deed, then we want to hear from, then it'll be counting every person on the deed. It could go either way. It just needs to be consistent and clear in how you're doing it. It's my understanding that in Cameron Park, there are multiple split families.
Yes, ma'am. Now that everybody seems to be informed and aware, and you have enough folks here, doesn't it seem that we should stop the process and really gauge the general public before we spend tax dollars and time of our council and citizens before this moves forward? It seems like we should just pause and have a meeting to really discuss this before it moves forward.
So I will take that back and speak to folks.
Spears?
Just quickly, Tanya,
yes.
Are the funds for this study coming from the money that you talked about that the council put aside for that sort of thing?
Yes, sir.
And do they approve that individually, each study, or it's just part of your budget?
No, it was, it was left, it was part of the budget specifically and going through the Raleigh Historic Development Commission.
So anyone that comes gets the money, no one has to approve it?
Well, it gets approved by the Raleigh Historic Development Commission.
Okay, so they approved the expenditure for the study?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
I would also like to say that there's a consideration of putting a sidewalk. Yeah, there's a consideration of putting a sidewalk on Oxford on the park side. So there's $165,000 is being spent on a study to determine whether or not to build a sidewalk from one end of Oxford to the creek. This is a $20,000 study. If you've ever seen one of these studies, what you get, and you get it forever, and the city gets it forever, it's like having Ancestry.com on your house. I mean, I think that's why they were passing around these books, because you get to see, oh, this is the kind of house I live in. This is the kind of house my neighbor, and it's like, as one person said, if the whole neighborhood ends up in the landfill someday, you would have the record. Doing the study means nothing. That's what you've been trying to tell us. And what I'm realizing here is that there's, all the people who are upset, and I really thank you. I don't know your name, but thank you for what you said, because as somebody who's been involved in it, there's so many crosswires and so many misunderstandings, and that's why I spoke to the nature of the communication. Some people don't think very well when the atmosphere gets highly charged. So, and what I'm noticing is that I think a lot of the people who are interested in this and care a lot about it are not saying anything. So it's not like all the people who are worried and upset and feel concerned, and as I said, the wires got crossed, but that doesn't mean the people who really want this study to happen are non-existent, because you're not hearing from them. So I'm just one of them. I want to say I would love to see the study go forward no matter what, because I'd like to have this information. I'd like the city to have this information. And I can tell you there are a lot more people than me who feel the same way. Because that's not what we're here to do.
I'll come back to you. This gentleman's had his hand up. There you go.
So I'm from the Hayes-Barton area, and we are at this point trying to develop an emailing list and a megaphone to be able to bring our neighbors together for this exact purpose, to find out who's interested in the neighborhood, what are the values, what's the integrity of the neighborhood, what are you interested in keeping, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a two-way street. We can try as hard as we do to get the information out, but even when the information gets out, a lot of people will just sit on it and not do anything until it gets to a point where decisions are to be made. So my point is, try to become involved in your neighborhood, connect with your neighbors, know what's going on, and use as many opportunities as you can to learn what's going on in the neighborhood. Share emails so that we can develop a mailing list and have this group meeting and go forward with the kind of information that you would need to be able to see what the neighborhood wants. I think it's important for the local neighborhood to have an additional layer of protection if that's what they want, but also to understand what the neighborhood is and what it wants. So that's where we are in our process now.
Thank you. And with that being said, you know, it doesn't have to be 3 years before we come back to talk about this subject again.
I just want to mention Tina Anderson, who's here keeping the facility open for us. We originally needed to leave by 8:30, but we can stay till 9. So please take advantage of any questions that you have for the city. Sorry. I'm sorry. We'll come back.
I know this is repeating the same question that several others have asked. I know this is repeating the same question that several of you have asked, but in the letter that we just received on Saturday, it says that, is there an architectural fabric to protect? The primary study funded by 15 neighbors indicates that yes, the majority of homes studied are zoned R4 and contributing to the makeup of potential historic district. All of our homes are not zoned R4, so right there, that is not a factual correct statement. Secondly, these homes were not designed all at the same time, nor were they built all at the same time. I think there's a majority of us here who are saying that April 9th meeting with 23 people representing 149 homes does not mean move forward with a study. We've not been notified, we've not been contacted, we've not been told what's going on. And so for the study to move forward at this point is not right. The majority do not support it. And I think that's evident by the people that are here. And I think that's evident from the meeting that happened in April, because they didn't want to take a vote because they knew they didn't have the numbers for it. So for the city website to state that that meeting indicated there was a majority to move forward on a study is not correct.
Thank you.
I don't live in Anderson Heights. I live in 5 Points, and we're dealing with a serious issue. We do have a historic overlay in our neighborhood, and we are fighting a huge battle against Hayes Barton Baptist Church. They want to tear down 6 homes in a row and build a parking lot. And so I've just kind of come in late, and I'm just not really understanding everything that y'all are talking about and saying, and with what your study is, the study that y'all are doing to become a historic district. But I'm telling you, for some reason, that's not protecting us.
Well, I'm going to say a quick thing.
It's
You're
not
in a
protecting
National
us.
Register historic district, not a historic overlay district.
We've got 2 houses, I believe, that are in the
national,
with the zoning.
There's perhaps it's the Neighborhood Conservation Overlay District, the NCOD that Jason talked about.
It's like these are historic homes.
At the risk of changing the subject for the large part of the room, and I'll get it back as quickly as you can. What happened to the NCOD when the UDO came in? Because is the NCOD 4 or 5 points still in effect? It did not go away when the UDO came in.
No, not at all.
Okay. So the 5 points does have an NCOD. I was on the group that decided, or that recommended the recommendation, or recommended the, not restrictions, whatever they are, the code that would be put in place. It is a political process, I will tell you that. This is what you're going through is part of the process. When we, again, I'm curious about HOD. I know the NCOD process was after we came up with the recommendation, it went to council. Council had to make the text change. Then we, as the committee who made the recommendation, went to all the neighbors. We literally went door to door with the petition. That was your opportunity to sign or not sign. We had to come back with 50 plus 1 signatures in order to get it to council to be voted on to ultimately be put in place. So I don't know if the HOD works exactly the same way, but that's certainly the way the NCOD worked. And so it's a political process.
It's not exactly the same, but that is similar in that after there's a report, that's the next step if it's going to move forward.
If my neighborhood is able to get a historic overlay, is that going to protect us from those 6 homes being destroyed?
Historic overlay district demolition designation does not prevent demolition. It does allow for there to be placed a 365-day demolition delay. The intent is to work with property owners on finding an alternative. So right now, if you're not in an overlay district, someone could go in tomorrow and get a demolition permit, and the house could be gone in however many days it takes.
2 homes that are zoned differently, and those 2 homes, I believe, are zoned so that you can't combine them and make a parking lot.
There's a lot of complicated zoning issues involved with that I can't answer, but right now, just on the ground, demolition versus not demolition.
So that's not going to help us, the historic district.
No. Perhaps not that case. What we've shown that it can do is help with where it does slow things down is speculative demolition. Folks coming in, tearing a house down to build something new and hope something that will buy it. But it does not, the state statutes do not allow us to prevent demolition.
Okay. Tanya, we have a question here.
My question is not nearly this complicated.
Yay.
We live on the even side of Fairview, which means we do not live in Hayes Barton. Where do we live? I mean, we refer to ourselves as living in Hayes Barton, but I know that the odd Fairview
I would have to look at a map. I'm not sure where the boundary. So
it's
first of all,
Fairview Road is the boundary.
It is. So I think that Bloomsbury is on the other side.
No, it's not Roanoke Park.
No, Bloomsbury.
No, is it Country Club Villas?
I'd have to look and see where you are. I mean, if you call or email and give me your address, I can pull it up and tell you. But or if somebody has the map.
We don't know where we live.
Huh? I don't know where you live.
I know.
It might be Bloomsbury. I'm not sure there's a map there.
Well, and also part of the challenge is what it says is a historic district may not be what you consider where you live.
So my guess is, in the end, a lot of this is about tear downs and tree canopy. And, well, so my question really is, are these the only 2 mechanisms the city has to have any influence over that type of thing?
Yes.
And it sounded like maybe only one of them could implement tree canopy, is that?
Correct. As I understand it, state statutes do not allow for regulation of trees on private property on lots under 2 acres in size unless you happen to be in a historic overlay district.
Okay. Any other questions on this side before we go to that side? Excuse me.
Yeah, I just want to ask a clarifying question.
Sure.
At the very beginning of your presentation, you made a comment that that you came here at the request of someone that had requested information be shared.
Yeah. Well.
And you said it was for a group that approached staff. Is that?
Yeah, that was some. I think Tom. Yeah. Well, Carol invited me specifically.
So this is strictly, this isn't phase 2 of what was on the, this isn't phase 2 of what was on the chart. This is strictly information.
Yes.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely. And we've had this presentation since 2015.
I know.
We've had it 2 or 3 times, I think, over the years because there is interest. Excuse me. Yes, but this is totally informational. Pass it around.
So I don't live in Anderson Heights either, but I'm just here and seeing this process, and it's crazy to me that the process we have to try to preserve our neighborhood's character is to pit neighbor against neighbor into death match over the single most valuable asset that they own. I mean, is there no objective standards about what is historically valuable? Like, what objective standards beyond the neighbors want it exist that govern this process?
That's why we do the report. That's to have a professional that has been educated and qualified and meets standards to do a report. But then ultimately, I mean, the alternative would be to have, city council in the city coming down and saying, we like this, we're going to do it whether you like it or not. So different neighborhoods have different personalities. There's always conflict. It's never everybody wants it. But the level of difference and whether or not it, gets beyond a report varies. I mean, we've spoken to Mordecai, we've spoken to Cameron Park, we've spoken here at 5 Points. Sometimes we hear things, sometimes we don't. Yes, sir.
So I don't live in Anderson Heights either, but I know some of y'all folks, and I'm sorry you're having such trouble. I don't really understand what the trouble is over, though. I live in Hayes Barton with Terry, and I don't want the same. Whatever it is y'all got, I don't want it. I know my neighbors don't want it. And I think the problem for me is Jason has an easy task in a way of telling us about some quantitative things. And you said this earlier, Tanya, and you were talking about qualitative things. And honestly, to this day, I don't understand how Lewis Cherry built his house in Oakwood. I don't want to open a big can of worms. But well, really what I'm getting at is, can you give us some concrete examples, Tanya? What does it mean if you're in a historic overlay district? I understand the other one, you can't build your house more than 5 feet from here or 10 feet from there, and it can't be X feet high, very quantitative. But, in one neighborhood, someone wants to put a garage on the front of their house. In another neighborhood, somebody wants to tear down a house. I don't know what the hell is happening in Anderson Heights. So I guess what I'm asking is, what can you not do in Oakwood or Glenwood, Brooklyn, or Street Side? Can you give us some concrete examples? You can't paint your house beige only in Cary. Can you do that? I just wonder what we're talking about.
In the Street Side Historic District, you can paint it pink and purple with purple polka dots if you wanted to, because the color is not regulated. However, I mean, I can give you vague, concrete examples. No, I know. In Oakwood, in Oakwood,
whatever the hell we're talking about.
You may not. You know what? You may not.
Oh, I don't know why I would. So I'm wondering.
Well, I think something that may be a good opportunity to do at another meeting, if the CAC is interested, is to have folks who live in historic overlay districts, new ones, old ones, and talk about their experiences. Because I know what it's like to be a historic preservationist, to work with the city and work with property owners. Some of them love the process. Well, okay, nobody loves the process. Some of them don't have a problem with the process. Some of them hate the process. But from what I've heard, like most recently going to the Boylan Heights Neighborhood Association, is they feel like that it has been a benefit to their neighborhood. And whether or not it's going to be a benefit to anybody else's neighborhood is going to be up to you. But hearing from others may help, particularly for those who are thinking about it.
Tanya, I'm going to pick up on that real quickly. Bob Fessmeyer, who was sitting by me, had to leave a little early. He helped drive the Glenwood, Brooklyn historic overlay street side last year, and he told me he's happy to speak to anyone who's interested. So if you are, contact me. Tanya, you probably have his number. I'm happy to give you his number, and he's happy to talk with anyone.
Are there fees associated with making an application for whatever, change of windows or colors?
Certificate appropriateness, yes. At the moment, the staff level approval is $29, and the major work is $147, I think. They're going to go up like 2%.
How long does it take to have an application either approved or denied?
If it is going through the major work process, the shortest time period is going to be about 2 months. For the minor work, it's going to take, right now, about 10 days or so. business days.
And if you are unhappy with the decision, what's the appeal process?
The appeal process is you can appeal a staff level decision to the commission. Decisions made by the commission are appealed to the Board of Adjustment. And then from there it goes to the court system.
And who sits on the Raleigh who sits on the panel that has to approve it if it's not staff level? Are those elected officials?
No, so the Raleigh Historic Development Commission is a city council appointed body made up of folks that have a demonstrated interest in historic preservation and or have some education. We've got architects, architectural historians, landscape architects, historians. There is a quarter that's required to live either in a regulated historic landmark or a regulated historic overlay district. The full commission does not sit on the COA committee. That's a group of 5 at the moment.
So as citizens, we don't get to vote these people in or out. So if we don't necessarily like their decisions, we don't have a say. It's the city council who appoints these people.
City council makes the appointments, yes.
Just checking.
Anybody else over here?
I don't know if your concern is who's sitting on the council and are they more likely to want to promote this, that, or the other, but I think the statistic that's incredibly important is only 1% of COAs get turned down, 1%. And I think it's also a really good question about how much do they cost and how long does it take. So that is a good question.
People who are pushing this forward assigned by city council to the committee to decide what I get to do with my house. Meanwhile, I have neighbors' houses that are falling apart around me, and they don't clean up their yards.
All right, are there any other questions, comments? I feel like Carol Merrill. Door number 3.
I'm just wondering how many neighborhoods in Raleigh have had a study done and how many have resulted. Is it a possibility, Tanya, that a study could be done and a neighborhood not qualify? Does that ever happen?
It has not, but it is conceivable, absolutely. I think particularly, so most of the time, districts are either already National Register districts or they're coming through at the same time. Earlier districts, it happened opposite. I mean, this was back in the 70s, but I think Oakwood was a local district before it was in the National Register. But what could happen, so that could happen. It could come back that even though an initial, quick study said this probably is, it's entirely possible that based on what's on the ground today and changes are happening every day, that looking at it again and looking where the boundaries may have to change because of demolitions and changes, it is conceivable that there may not be anything left that is substantive enough to be a district, but we won't know that for sure.
But then if it were to go through, it has to be pushed by the people in the neighborhood. It's not something that the city council says.
The city won't do anything with the report. The Historic Development Commission won't do anything in the report other than say, hey, we've got this great report, and put it up on the website for people to see.
Okay, thank you.
So my understanding is that a report was just done for the National Historic Registry designation, which was denied, that we didn't qualify in Anderson Heights. So why is another report necessary?
Okay, 2 different things, and it was called a study list application. It was like 3 paragraphs and a real quick look. The National Register, the criteria for the National Register of Historic Places is very academic and places greater emphasis on architectural integrity and less on local significance. So there is a possibility for there to be a district that while it may not meet the same standards as the National Register, would still have significance at the local level. It's a zoning overlay. It's a zoning overlay. First of all, there are only 3 of us. We are not out there patrolling. Districts that are designated, it's a partnership between the neighborhood, the city, and the Historic Development Commission, and we rely on finding out. But it is a zoning overlay. Worst case scenario is we get a report of a violation. We say, hey, you need to file. If it's approvable, it gets approved. If it is not approved, then you have to undo things. If you don't do that, then there are the zoning fines, same as any other zoning. It very rarely gets to that point, but it is a zoning overlay. I will take it back and share with my boss, with Ken, and then with Ken Bowers, the planning director, and just share what I heard tonight. I guess that's a very good question. There are a couple of ways. I can certainly email you, and you can share something on the list. Anybody that has already emailed me or called me that's in the queue, I will. I think I've already unflagged some of them because I respond, but I will, reply again. By the way, this is what happened, and put it on the website. Does that? I mean, that is something you would have to.
So I think you've received a lot of emails from a lot of us.
I know. Yeah, I have.
So I don't know if is someone compiling a list of everyone who's emailed. I think a lot of us have emailed and expressed either that we're for this or against this.
So,
I know I've emailed Steph, and I know a lot of my neighbors have. So I think at some point I just feel like somebody should be figuring out who's for it and who's against it, and it should kind of be an easy numbers game.
Yeah, I agree. Seems good.